We are delighted to introduce Goldie Goldblum, the author of On Division. On Division was the book that launched Lockdown Literature in NLTV. Goldie was born in Perth, Australia, raised on a family farm, and attended various seminaries in both Australia and America. She started writing after the birth of her 8th child. Goldie now lives in Chicago, where she teaches creative writing at Northwestern University. Among her many honors, she is a recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, the Association of Writers and Writing Programs Novel Award, and the Jerusalem Post International Fiction Prize. As well as being shortlisted for this year's prestigious Wingate Prize here in the UK, On Division was awarded the Association of Jewish Libraries Book of the Year in 2020. On Division is her 3rd novel. So thank you very much, Goldie, for sparing us your valuable time to address us at Norris Lee. For the benefit of the viewers, I will offer a brief interview of the plotline On Division, but I will not give too much away, if anything. Suri, the central character, a member of the Orthodox Satmar sect, living on Division Street in Williamsburg, discovers that as a 57-year-old mother of 10 children and a grandmother of 32, she's pregnant again with twins. Her anxiety about the gossip they would inevitably invoke leads her to hide her condition for as long as possible. Her success at keeping her condition from even her own husband of 41 years leads us to wonder why. The first thing I should tell you, Goldie, is actually, despite having only one copy of the book, the story has been avidly devoured by every member of our shul management team. One of them is Rabbanit Batya. So over to you, Batya.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, you know, when Martin introduced me to the book, he says you have to read this, and I literally read it in a few hours. It was such a page turner, and I should admit I'm not a big reader. You know, it's hard to find the time, but really it was really a very interesting and fascinating story. So, you know, maybe one of the reasons that it was interesting to me was, you know, there's always the Hasidic background to it. So what, you know, it's a fiction, right? You know, how much truth was there in that story?
How did I come up with this idea? Where did this idea come from? And the idea came, well, it didn't come so easily, actually. What happened was my son, Yuda, who's a musician, had kind of been sort of not recording his music, and he's a phenomenal singer-songwriter. So I said to him, you know what, let's have a creative challenge. You will go into your studio for 10 days and you'll record your music, and you'll come back and you'll have a CD for me. And I will go into my study for 10 days and I will just write my head off, and eventually I will produce, you know, some pages to show you. And he said, yeah, great, let's do it. And I was like, oh, awesome. And then I thought, oh no, I'm really usually writing about historical things that take hours and hours of research. How on earth am I going to just write something off the top of my head? And so the very first morning I sat down and I thought, okay, what do you know a lot about? What do you not need to research? And I thought, well, I know a lot about the Hasidic community because I'm part of it. I know a lot about midwifery. I know a lot about the queer community. I know a lot about like children, raising children. And I know a lot about Williamsburg. So then I was like, okay, I got it. I have a story, and I just started writing it. So
that, all of that together in one story.
I was just like, I'm just going to like put that together and see what happens. So that's where I got the idea, and how much truth is in it. There's a lot of truth in this story. This story is based on many people's actual life stories. I worked extremely hard with a lot of different people to make sure that it's as factual as possible. Obviously, Suri is not a real person. Her husband is not a real person. Lipa is not a real person. The characters are not real people, but they are based on the lives of many people that I know. So Lipa, for example, is based on the lives of 3 young men that I know who committed suicide. It's not, this is the, you know, I didn't imagine his circumstances. I interviewed his parents, or the three young men's parents.
Well, one of the things I really appreciated in the book was that, you know, especially with the, you know, specifically, I mean, and it's really across the world, not only in London, about that, you know, there's a lot of, you know, angst against the Hasidic movement, you know, with the whole COVID situation and whatnot. And the Unorthodox, you know, series that came out, and the way you portrayed the relationship between Suri and her husband, you know, showing that there was such love and respect between the two of them, I thought was so beautiful. You know, it was really, it was, you know, it was heartwarming to see that, yeah, they do have great relationships.
Yeah, I mean, you know for yourself, one of the things, you know, I don't want to say anything about Unorthodox or about the woman who wrote it, because, you know, everybody's experiences are different. Her life circumstances were completely different. You know, what happened to her, totally different story. And, you know, people write about their own stories. And so when it comes to this, though, I don't know, you know, when I look around my community, I see so many people that I'm very close with for more than 30 years, who have excellent relationships with their husbands. I see people who have really warm and loving and joyous Shabbosim. I don't know anybody actually who has miserable Shabbosim. You know, when because I watched people say to me, "Oh, did you see Unorthodox?" Okay, yes, now I can say, yes, I did see it. And the thing that really struck me was, who sits around on Shabbos all Morish Haredik, all miserable because they're at the Shabbos time? Nobody sits around miserable at the Shabbos. I don't know people. Let's put it that way. And so I tried to write, in writing this book, I felt so often we're seen, the Hasidic community is seen from outside, people looking in, or it's seen from people who left and have feelings, right, about leaving. But it's so rare that there's actually a book written by a literary writer. Actually, I'm the first literary writer who's written a book from inside the Hasidic community, and tried to portray that not as like a La La Land, you know, through the Jewish publishers or whatever. Just try to portray it accurately. This is what we actually have in our lives. We have these things and we have these things. We have these wonderful things, these reasons to stay in the community, and we have these things that can be problematic, right? And to write that as a balance, rather than to say, oh yes, it's perfect, or oh my gosh, it's a disaster. It's neither thing. No community in the world is all disaster or all la-la, right? It's some balance. And so I aimed for accuracy.
Absolutely. I you know, just to even the relationship that she had with her mother-in-law, how you portrayed that also gave such a beautiful and positive yashipach on that.
Thanks.
It's interesting because whenever I think of Williamsburg, I always think of The Chosen. Mm-hmm. And I wondered whether, I think you called him Mr. Liptop, is the new Danny Saunders. But Chaim Potok always said that even though it takes place in Williamsburg, the themes are universal.
Yes.
Do you think that's the same on Division?
Oh, 100%. I do think that the themes are universal. And obviously my publisher did too, because they didn't pick up a Jewish book to just publish for the Jews. They picked up a book that they felt that the themes were universal. And, you know, the front cover of the book, this is just the paperback version, right? So the front cover has a bridge on it. And there's a strong reason for there being a bridge on there. Obviously, Suri walks across the bridge every single day. But this idea that these divisions grow up between people, they grow up between mother and child, they grow up between husband and wife, they grow up between community and other communities, they grow up between, in the United States, Republicans and Democrats. There are these divisions that grow up between people who love each other. And how do we find the way to build a bridge? And in particular, like one of the things that I really see, at least here in the United States, is that people are looking in at the Jewish community, or in particular in the Hasidic community, and they're just like, you are really other, you are really weird, you are not like us. And as I've pointed out to all the many, many groups of non-Jews who have asked me to do exactly this, to do the Zoom, we do the same things. We alienate ourselves from, we separate ourselves from people that we don't understand, whether that's our own child or whether that's a community that we don't understand. And yet internally, we're the same. We have the same concerns. We want to love and be loved. We want to care about our children. We want to find satisfying work. We want to have connections with people that we care about. So I think that those are universal themes.
Yeah, it's interesting because Sureen didn't have a best friend. And while she didn't share or even tell, call it what you will, her husband, she chose some very strange people to share her pregnancy with. A very eclectic bunch of people. Some were strangers, some, well, okay, her mother-in-law, fair enough, but everybody but her husband.
Mm.
And I didn't understand why she felt the shame. We've all been to weddings, well, I have at least, where the grandmother's pregnant.
Yes, me too.
So I don't understand where the shame, and was she protecting her husband from the shame by not telling him?
So, people have asked me this, and at least, I don't know, I think in Crown Heights, it's a lesser sense, but also in Williamsburg, it's a stronger sense that at a certain point, not to be too specific, women shut up shop and they say, you know what, now it's done. Our childbearing years are over. And partially that's because of the risk, the tremendous increased risk of having a child with Down syndrome or other genetic abnormalities. And as a responsible parent, as somebody who's concerned about those kind of things, many women will kind of be more cautious as those years, advance. Certainly in your 50s, you're not thinking, in your late 50s, you're not thinking, oh yes, I'm going to get pregnant and have another child right now. And if you did, there's an aspect to it where you've been reckless. You've been reckless for the child that might be born. You've been reckless for the children that you have, because it's going to impact their lives as well. So she's embarrassed and ashamed because this is like it's an indictment on her as a parent, actually, as a mother.
Do you think that also in the Hasidic sect, that they have that same shame? Like even the response of the daughter, that, oh my gosh, how could you have done this?
Right.
How realistic is that?
So it's really realistic. So part of it is, like there's the two things. Mazel tov, wow, what a nace, what a miracle. But then there's this other, the more like the underneath version where you're like, what were you thinking? Right? Both things happen simultaneously. Mazel tov, it's a nace. Mazel tov, it's a miracle. Whoa, that is wild. And that is wild part. It doesn't get so verbally acknowledged, but it's there. It's definitely there.
So yeah, I mean, I found it's interesting how you describe the universalism of the book about really about the other. When I read it, when I came off of it after the end, I thought it was really a psychological.
Yes.
It was very thriller. I don't want to say thriller, but like she had this issue that she buried deep down, and until another trauma came on, she was able to deal with that other trauma that she buried.
Yeah.
And it was a great lesson. I mean, that you really need to work through your issues to be able to move forward in life. How did that all come about?
Yeah. So I do think that On Division is a psychological story. It's a very internal story. It's internal to Sari's world. And like a lot of women have called me up, in the Hasidic community, and they've said, you got me. You wrote my story.
Wow.
And like, obviously I didn't write their story, but like I wrote a universal story where it's like people's struggles to, connect with their children. It's their struggles to connect with their husband when there's something between them. It's their struggles to talk about really difficult things in their lives. And, in the case of Sari, it's difficult for her to talk about her son Lipa, who was gay. So in the Hasidic community, it's really hard to talk about that, so hard. And she has no language even to talk about it with her husband, with her family members. And so his death is kind of erased almost. And she doesn't want it to be. She's not ready for it to be erased. And Lipa, from his part, he's not ready for it to be erased either, right? So I think that that's interesting. And it's interesting because, you know, in smaller and larger ways, everybody, I feel like, has stuff like that. Things that kind of just get pushed away for now. Maybe we'll get back to it, and then you don't.
Right, and it gets hard. The rug gets larger and larger. And I think when I saw on Division, right? So right away I knew, okay, it's Division Street, you know, in Williamsburg. But then when you read the book, you realize that there's a division that's being drawn, that's happening between you know the characters, you know.
Yeah, it's between the characters. It's between, you know, even twins are a division, right? If you think about that, right? So there's all these different divisions that happen. And it's interesting because like one of the group, or actually a couple of the groups have talked to me and they've said, oh, it's, you know, right from the start, I could see how the Hasidic community really judges its own. And I said, oh, let me ask you a question, please. And I said, so if your son has been smoking weed out the backyard and not doing very well in school, and he ends up going to the local community college, and your next door neighbor's kid has been studying like a maniac and ends up in Harvard, are those two going out? Would they even consider you as, you know, any kind of marriage material for their kid? No? Oh, so there's no judgment in the outside world, right? Right. So of course there's judgment everywhere. It just depends on what.
Well, it was interesting because I was intrigued when Sully was talking about the shidduch. So obviously they had a bad shidduch because of the son, because she complains about what the son-in-law was wearing at the chuppah.
Yeah. And
the way she says that, you know, families can get ostracized, the butcher gives them fat meat, there's no play dates, etc., etc. And that's certainly division, that's certainly judgment. And yet the other side of it is, and there were two facets of it, because I remember when my sister was reading the book, she came to the part where they raised, I think it was $1 million for bail for the son. She thought, what do you think? That's wonderful. But a few chapters on, the same community raised the same money for someone else.
Yes, I might have written that on purpose.
Now you say, was the £1 million not to protect anybody's reputation, but to except for the community's reputation?
Yes, it's the community's reputation. So the only way that I can really understand this, and I talked about this with like my Satmar fact checkers and stuff, because I wanted to understand, what does it mean when the community goes out and they raise $1 million, £1 million for a pedophile? You know, what are they doing when they do that? I don't understand. And so they said to me, listen, it's nothing to do with him, because that man was fired the second that the accusation was made. He was fired. He was never allowed to go near children again. So they knew. They said, oh no, we don't want him near our kids. Done, right? They weren't raising money to protect him. They were raising money to protect the reputation of the Satmar community as a whole. Oh, okay, so I could understand that. The United States does that. Britain does that. Every place does that to protect the reputation of the larger group rather than just this one person. Yes.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the subject or the victim never had a chance to receive the benefit of Goldie's wisdom. And I'm sure Goldie had a lot to tell her. Well, including her current pregnancy. But Goldie found relief in the hospital.
Sorry. At first I laughed because I thought you were talking about me, and I was like, really? And I realized,
sorry. Sorry.
Sorry, it's all good.
Oh gosh.
She's confusing the fact and the fiction now.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's the
Thankfully, I never got pregnant with twins when I was 57. Thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
Abish. I'm all good.
Just for the record. But she made friends with Val, the midwife, through all the other pregnancies. But I was surprised she let that gynecologist get the better. Well, I suppose get the better of her, because I thought by now, being an advocate for all those other people, she'd have turned around and given him a mouthful, but she didn't.
Well, I wonder why. What do you think?
I don't know. It seemed a little bit out of character. Maybe she was covering up her own shame with the sheets of paper.
Or for others, she was ready to speak out for.
Yes,
maybe.
That's right. For anybody else who came.
Anybody else, but when it came to herself, and again, because she's dealing with this inner demons in her, in herself, she's trying to figure out. She maybe deserves it, so to speak. I don't know. I mean,
yeah. I mean, if you think about the different ways that people, people handle themselves, I could see, in fact, I do see all the time in my community, advocates, people who are like very powerful movers and shakers in my community who do different things. And then when it comes to themselves, they're far less protective, far less cautious. They don't necessarily take the same kind of care for themselves that they would for another human being. So, a dear friend of mine would, let's say, send my kid to go study in yeshiva. Meanwhile, maybe she doesn't have money to send her own kid to yeshiva, right? So she's trying to do something good for other people, but she won't waste, so to speak, the money on herself. And that's true for other people as well. We're such complicated human beings, right? We do things, we try to do more things, we do this, we do that, we don't do this, we don't do that. Those are the things that make somebody seem real, this contrariness.
Oh, they were real characters. Yeah, from a simple man's point of view, every time I turned over another page when it came to another Yontif, I thought, well, tell him already. Right? It's Hanukkah, it's Purim, it's Pesach, for goodness sake. And then you think, is he a shlemiel or what?
How did he not figure it out yet?
That's right, because I think the mother-in-law figured it out.
Yes, yeah, she did. I love that on you. She's my favorite.
Oh, yes. But you wonder then, I wonder if her husband had any secrets from her. And he didn't want to bring his things up.
Well, what do you think?
Well,
does anything come up in the book? Does anything come up in the book where he has a secret?
No, but
I'm not sure about that, Mr. Kaye.
Okay, well, maybe I read it from a man's point of view, you see. And men don't have secrets. But maybe that's why he didn't want to say, no, you pregnant, just in case something else came up.
Right. You see, once you start fiddling around, you're opening a can of worms, really. Are you keeping a pregnancy from me? Oh, really? Are you keeping Leapers gainers from me? Are you keeping other things from me, right? You don't know what's going to happen. And these awkward conversations, I don't know about you guys, but I have a large family. I have 8 kids, Kanai, and if I see my kid kind of doing this, I'm like, oh, do I actually want to know? And that's the question. Do I actually want to know? Sometimes I'm like, no, actually, I think I'm just going to pretend I didn't see whatever.
Yeah, because they didn't share Mr. Laptop's CD with the father, did they?
No.
That was a secret with all of them.
Yes. Yeah.
And so maybe that was also a way of linking the mother with one of the daughters, something in common, a secret, a division between the two of them and the rest of the families. Yeah. And maybe
I'm sure you guys all have perfect families, and it never happens in your families that there's these little micro divisions that open up. That would never happen in anybody's family besides my own. So I was just writing about my own family there.
But the nice thing is at the end, without spoiling the plot, the husband knows where to find her at the end.
Yes. Yeah.
How does the Hasidic community welcome, or I mean, have you had negative feedback about you writing? I mean, how was their response to it?
I've been ridiculously pleased with the response to this book from the Frum community. I've heard from a lot of women in Satmar. I've heard from a lot of people in the Lubavitch community who just said, you wrote us. This is the first book that I read that's actually accurate to our lived experience, to our lives. And like women have called me and said, I bought 8 copies of this book so I can give out to all of my daughters-in-law. And like, we all read it together and it was great. And my favorite story though is last year, my son was killed. He was a Marine in the United States Marines. And when I was sitting Shiva, this woman, a Satmar woman, a very elderly woman came and she said to me, you know, I read this book and I was crying and I was yelling and it was my family and I felt like you were writing about my life. And as I was doing that, my husband, you know, he's in his 90s, my husband kept on saying to me in Yiddish, what's going on? And I said, oh, I'm reading this book. And he's never read a book in his life. You know, he's read, of course, Torah, but he's never read a novel in his life. And he kept on asking her, what's going on? What's it about? Tell me more about it. And when she finished, she was crying, not to give away the ending, but she was crying. And he said, tell me what happened. Read me the book. And so she ended up reading the book out loud to him. And he also was crying and moved by it. And at the end, he said, start again. Start at the beginning. Do it again.
Wow.
And for me, that means I was successful. I was successful in writing about real people's lives, real people's experiences with those divisions that break us apart from people we really care about, people we love.
Yeah, because it definitely, I wonder how many secular people or non-Jews, you know, are able to understand the book really, because there's a lot of, you know, I mean, I guess you give a glossary, but you know, there's a lot of Jewishness in there. There's a lot of stuff, right?
Right. So, you know, I feel very satisfied, very pleased actually, that the book is very successful in communicating Jewish ideas to the larger world. You know, it's very popular in France. It's very popular in Germany. Wow. It's not being purchased by Jews in France and Germany. Maybe a few, but like the vast majority of the people who are writing to me from France and Germany are non-Jews who say, oh, wow, I had a different feeling about the Hasidic world. I thought something different. And now I'm seeing that you know, these are the reasons that people might stay. And I'm like, that's right. Like nobody's going to stay. Like, so this is one of the things that people will say to me. They'll say, oh, you know, I until I read your book, I didn't understand why, if the Hasidic world is really like in that film, Unorthodox, or like some of these other things. If the Hasidic world is really like that, why do so many people stay? And my point has been, well, look, read the book. You'll see why people stay. Are there things that aren't good in the Hasidic community? Of course there are. There's things that are not good in every community.
Exactly.
But are there things that are ridiculously amazing in the Hasidic community? Yes. Yeah, and here they are. Look, this is them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I you know what, Yasher Koach once again for that. I think we all need to hear that, because as fellow Jews and as fellow human beings, you know, we're always there. People, it's very easy to point out the negative and the terrible things in every community, and to have a book that, you know, that mentions the bad things that happen, but also brings out the beauty in a community like that is amazing. And it's really
right. Well, you know, from my perspective, if I'm reading a book and all I'm getting is like all the positive, I feel like I'm being played. I feel like it's propaganda. And the opposite is true. If I'm reading a book and it's just all negative, I'm like, you're also, you have an axe to grind. You're trying to convince me of something. I don't want to be convinced.
Right.
I want to see an accurate, balanced portrayal, and then I'll decide.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's interesting because, it's 2 years ago now, we brought over Jonathan Indersky, who was one of the writers of Shtisel.
Yes.
And he was telling us when they were pitching the story, first of all, everybody said to them, we want someone to lead the community, then we'll buy it. He said, no, you don't understand. They don't leave. We're not having that. No, that's not reality. That's the way you want it, but that's not the reality. Eventually,
even though he himself had left.
He left. Yes, that's the irony. He left.
Right.
But he recognized that it wasn't the norm, and he didn't want to portray that in this book. He's a very good friend of Martin's, by the way.
Yeah. No, so I really appreciate that. You know, like my kids said, you should look at Shtisel, Mommy, because it's like a balanced portrayal, and it was. It's really good. You know, and I appreciate that when somebody is able to say, you know, like, here's life. Here's what it's like for people who live in this, you know, like if somebody was going to write a book about Namibia, I don't want the travel guide to Namibia, and I don't want the drug culture from Namibia. I want like the whole picture. Right?
Yeah. I hope we've intrigued the viewers. They're going to see this video and they've run out and buy the book. If only because the way we discussed about it, nothing. And we haven't given the plot away, which is good. But we've just given them, I hope, enough of an insight without giving too much away. So thank you once again for a wonderfully crafted book, and for sparing your valuable time. And on behalf of Batya and myself, we wish you the best of luck for the Wingate Prize.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Mr. Kaye and Rabbanit Batya, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And it's very fun talking to people who read the book and liked it. It's like, I enjoy that. What can I tell you?
Yeah.
It was really, marvelous book. And Yasher Koach once again for just bringing that positive spin on it. Really.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And hope the COVID goes well for everybody. Everybody should
stay safe. And keep up the spirit and keep up that positivity and keep shining that light onto everybody.
We will. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.